Well, good evening, everyone. Photography Basics 4. I don't know if there's anybody joining us for the first time, but if you are joining us for the first time, or maybe it's just the first time you're watching the recording, welcome. My name is Martin Craig. I've been doing the sessions here. This is the fourth and final session. Really excited to kind of be coming in for landing, conclusion, and hopefully we'll tie a few things together with what we've learned and learn one or two new things as well. Actually, before I click on, we're just talking about this image. I've had a few images here over the last few sessions, and I haven't really spoken about them very much. As much as anything, they're just there to fill a template, make that home page, so that first page looks good, right? But you know, as I was just describing this to Diane, and it was one of those. I went out specifically to shoot this, but it was also fortunate, opportunistic, planned, lucky, all rolled into one. And I thought I'd kind of just touch on that for a second, because everything I've just said there is what goes into photography, right? Many of my good photos have had that touch of luck, right? You've kind of got to be there, at the right time, otherwise you're never going to get it. But it's something that happens in the scene, which is a bit surprising sometimes, or the unplanned thing, which makes the image. So I'd done some scouting the day before. I'd gone over to France, obviously, Thanksgiving. This is my son, daughter-in-law, and my wife, Hillary, over here. And we'd gone out just walking around casually, just getting used to jet lag and things. And so I'd read, you know, when you go out if you want to do any photography and you've got time and a place, don't go out with your camera initially. Go and wander. Go and, you know, enjoy the sights. Just enjoy it for what it is. But I took my iPhone and I'm snapping away. And as I was reviewing the photos afterwards, specifically to see whether I'd got any good shots, good angles, things like that, this one jumped out at me. And so the following day we went out, and obviously I had my camera and a good camera and lenses and things like that. And so I'm lined up to take this image. And just as I'm about to take it, this person on the sort of bike with, I think it looks like he's got his son on there or something. Yeah, just happened to come into the frame. And I'm like, oh, come on, man. I'm just about to click the shutter, but I figured I'd take it and see what happens, right? So it was a deliberate decision to take the photo, but I almost missed it. I almost thought I'm just going to let them go, because this is what you know, we get so focused sometimes on the main subject that we forget about the details. Now, I think this image just would not have been as good. It might have looked as colorful, but just the story here, right? Where is this person going? The shadow filling this space. Obviously, for me, it's a nice memory because I've got family members walking up, but then you've got, looks like another dad holding the hand of a child here. You know, and yeah, for me, it's a wonderful image because of some of the things that happen by accident, right? A purist might say, well, the sun's a bit blown out, but actually I was talking to a professional photographer, an amazing printer, person that is a friend of Brentwood Photography Group, just this last weekend, and I was showing him this image. And I said, yeah, it's a bit of a shame, right? He said, there's nothing you can do about that. There's nothing you can do about it. If you're taking a photo into the sun, it's going to be white, unless you really stop it down, but then everything else would be black, right? And so, yeah, so that's kind of an image I took. Some is partly by accident, but certainly planned. It was a planned accident, right, they say. All right, I'm going to whiz through the beginning slides, which I always like to do. Photography is so much more than pressing a button, as I've kind of just described, right? But this comes from Jen Vogel. It's one of her sayings. She runs an amazing organization, ministry really, called Able Voices, helping later teens and young adults with special needs through photography and building friendships and having fun. I love the way she's taken that PA. So photography, friends, and fun. And that's a key sort of part of what we do at Brentwood Photography Group. So if you haven't joined yet, it's $40 a year, and we do a bucket load of stuff, right? Loads of monthly meetings. We do monthly meetings, contests, photography basics, which is what we're doing now, mini clinics, outings, etc. So yeah, if you want to get involved with a local group, have some fun, and we'd love love to see you there. To that point about events, there's a couple coming up here. I won't dwell on this, but if you get the chance to go along to a meeting, we've got some great sessions coming up here. Martin Cray, I've been doing photography for a while now. Started out in the film days, which was good, learned a ton there. Yeah, set up a photography business, which I did on the side. I needed my regular day job to fund the habits, as it were. But I did make some decent money early on here, and that did really help pay for some decent equipment. Married to my beautiful wife, 37 years, 3 kids. They're all married, grown up now, and 2 beautiful grandkids. So session 1 and 2, that's where we're really focused. So this is a distribution of the attendees or the people signed up. And now we're moving in session 3, session 4 to some of the more intermediate and advanced topics. Again, really quick as a reminder here, this is exposure and light, right? So we said that exposure is just another word for light, and the word photography literally means drawing with light, took from 2 Greek words, photo and graph. And there's a technical element to photography and a creative element to photography. I'm actually just getting a little bit of noise from somebody. Could you just check, please, that if you are muted? I'm hearing somebody somewhere. So thank you for that. So creative side, a technical side, creative composition, static versus motion, in focus versus blur, black and white or color, and the technical elements of shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. And we've focused on shutter speed and aperture the first 3 weeks here, and which helped us create nicely composed images, and then those other things that I mentioned, right? And so I showed you how to set your camera for shutter speed. It's timer value, it's an S. This is a Canon, so it's an S on Sony and Nikon's. That's that one. And then aperture, but also now we're introducing ISO today. So we've kind of touched on it a little bit in some of the previous sessions, but I haven't really explained it relative to shutter speed and aperture, so I'm going to have a go at doing that tonight. So session 4, again, it's really a focus on ISO, but we'll bring some of the other concepts out. I'll pause there for a second. Any questions, either relative to this or maybe even from previous sessions? And if you do have any questions, please feel free to shout out or put something in the chat panel. Diane, if you could let me know if anybody puts anything in the chat, and I'll try and address that along the way. Thanks.
Will do.
So here's the inside view of a camera. So we've taken the lens off here, and this silvery color, blue, purpley thing is the sensor. And it's basically like a mirror. You could look in there and you could kind of see yourself. And the light comes in through the lens, it hits this sensor, and this sensor translates those photons, right, those light beams, into colors, shapes, right, blacks, whites, contrast, darks, lights, all that kind of stuff, and it produces the image. So that's what the sensor does. So the lens itself, by virtue of the shutter speed and the aperture, is what controls the amount of light going into the camera, and the sensor is basically a way of the sensor becomes more sensitive based on the ISO, sensitive or otherwise based on the ISO setting. And so I'm kind of getting ahead of myself a little bit, but I think what I've just said will also make sense as I go through some of these words as well. So exposure is controlled by shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. And then this is from Wikipedia. In photography, ISO stands for the International Organization for Standards, a non-governmental organization that sets standards for many industries, including photography. ISO, in this case, measures a camera's sensitivity to light, which affects the brightness of an image. This is from the Adobe site. do not write this down. Do not memorize this statement, right? ISO controls the amount of light your camera lets in, and therefore how dark or light your photos will be. ISO doesn't control the amount of light getting into the camera, only shutter speed and aperture, right? Fast shutter speed, not much light. Slow shutter speed, more light can get in because it's got more time to get in. Small aperture, tiny hole, only a little bit of light can get in. Big aperture, more light can get in because there's more room, a very unscientific phrase, more room for the light to go in, literally more photons get in. Then they hit the sensor, right? And now, based on the ISO setting, this sensor has a sensitivity. If it's very sensitive, it records, if you like, it kind of magnifies the amount of light going in. That's kind of true, right? But think of it as it magnifies. ISO, high ISO settings magnifies the light going in. Low ISO basically doesn't magnify it. Yeah? And there's an effect of that amplification, a negative effect sometimes, if you amplify the light that goes in. And we'll get to that in a second. So only shutter speed, aperture size affect the amount of light that enters the camera. However, ISO does control the sensitivity of the camera sensor, and therefore it controls exposure. So remember, I said for exposure, you've got the three things: shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. So I know I've dwelt on that. Maybe I've gone over things several times, but it's, you know, I'm trying now to bring together these three pillars. You'll sometimes hear this referred to as the exposure triangle. I personally don't like that because I'm a mathematician and I think it's wrong, right? And I've actually seen that online as well from other people. So, but if you come across the exposure triangle, it means you've got shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, kind of the three corners, and they all work together to balance out the exposure such that you get a nice image. So these are the three pillars. Apertures, I've just said, small hole, not a lot of light gets in, but things are in focus from front to back. And then we go all the way through to a big hole or a large aperture, and with that lets lots of light in, and also gives us the effect of blurry backgrounds and blurry foregrounds. Remember, there's a portion before what's called the focus plane, which is where the subject is. So you'll focus on a subject, that's really the focus plane. And there's an area in front of that person, which is or that subject, whether it's a person or whatever it is, in front of that subject, that's in focus, and some that's behind. And it's usually about a third in beforehand and 2/3 behind. Again, that's a rough rule of thumb, not an exact science, but gives you an idea. So there's always more in focus behind the subject. So that's aperture. Shutter speed is, as I've said, a fast shutter speed freezes the motion. A slow shutter speed, these are seconds or hundredths of a second, gives you a blurred. Doesn't freeze the motion. And this doesn't let in a lot of light. This lets in a lot of light. For ISO and the sensitivity, an ISO of 50, so I think Nikon's, maybe Sony's, I don't know, but go down to an ISO of 50. Canon starts at 100, and then they go up to 25,600 and beyond. And what this graphic is trying to show is, if you're at these lower ISO settings, there's no interference. I think you can see these dots here. We call that noise. And it comes as a result of increasing the sensitivity of that sensor. And so the negative of increasing the sensitivity is it creates for a noisier image. So I'm going to show you actually some real photos in a second. But the benefit to increasing the sensitivity is it lets more light in. So just like a half a second lets more light in, and f1.4 lets more light in, a high ISO lets more light in, but it also introduces more noise. So those are the four pillars. You'll sometimes see it represented as a triangle as well. So the effect of varying ISO for a fixed, so this is kind of the rule, the statement. So for a fixed shutter speed and aperture setting, i.e. the shutter speed isn't going to change and the aperture setting isn't going to change, the ISO needs to vary in order to achieve a correct exposure depending on the scene of the image, right? So here's a dark scene, Paris, nighttime. So let's assume we have a shutter speed of 200ths of a second, and we set the aperture to f8, so they're not going to change. And we tell the camera, you can change the ISO such that this would be a pleasing image. So this is not the photo here. This is what it would look like to the naked eye, but you can't see very much. And so what you want to do is have the camera take a photo of this, but it come out more like this. So if we think of this as the normal scene that we would be shooting for, even though that this is middle of the day or overcast, if you take a photo during sort of dusk like this where it's dark and you fix your shutter speed and aperture, you let the ISO, the camera change the ISO. And I'm just suggesting here by way of example, it could be 6400. This would result in a perfectly exposed image with some noise. And it may look something like this. The same for a normal light or an overcast day. Let's assume we have a shutter speed of 200 per second. Aperture is f8. That would need a lower ISO because I have more light. Therefore, I don't need more sensitivity on my sensor. This also would result in a perfectly exposed image, but with very little noise. So ISO 400. And then if we have a bright scene, full sunlight, and we assume 200th of a second, f8, the ISO might go down to 100. And this too would result in a perfectly exposed image, but with no noise at all. So what I'm trying to show here is that we fixed two of the constants. The third one can be allowed to change. And by virtue of it changing, it will produce a perfectly exposed image. But the consequence could be you may introduce noise. So we'll dig into an example here. So this is Hillary somewhere in Colorado, down in some cave somewhere, or a building, and there's an opening here. And I thought this would be kind of a cool shot back in the day. I'm just trying to be all arsey, right? But it's dark, and that's okay. But as you, and that's how the shot was taken, right? That's how I expose the image, 1/60th of a second, f4.5. So I don't need, I'm hand holding. It's 55 millimeters what I've set it to. So 60th of a second is okay. And I'm holding it very firmly. f4.5, not a large depth of field, but I don't need that because it's just basically a wall behind her or a cave. But my ISO here is 2500. That's quite high for the camera that I was using at the time. This was probably 15 years ago. And an ISO of 2500 15 years ago produced noise like this. I hope that comes through. It's kind of very grainy, so I've zoomed in a little bit back here. So on night or dark scenes, the noise may only be apparent when increasing the exposure in post-processing. So what I mean by that is you don't see any noise over here, because if it's a dark scene, even though there is noise, it just doesn't show. It's only when you bring it into tools like Lightroom and post-process it, which I'll show in a second, you'll see some of this noise. So let me go into Lightroom and see if I can reproduce this. The image, reset it. Okay, so that's the image as I took it, right? And and then you can see 60th of a second, f4.5, 25th to 2500 ISO. And if I bring the exposure up, you see things are starting to come into detail now. Hillary's face is getting too bright, and I'm introducing noise back here. So I zoom in there. Well, I don't know whether can you see that? For me, it's all mottled. That sometimes I don't know if it comes through with zoom 300. I think that should be very sort of pixelated, and that's what's happening. That's a direct result of using that high ISO. But if we make it dark again, we'll lose that noise. The noise is basically hidden by virtue of making the image dark. So that's noise being introduced. The other thing I was going to show here again, this is, I've kind of reset it. I'll just click reset. So again, that's how I took the image straight from the camera. Look at this histogram here. I'm going to explain this a few times. All this is data. Think of just this as data think of it as light. This end is black. So you see if I hover here, you can see it says blacks. If I go all the way over here, probably doesn't say white because there's no data, but this would be where the white. So this is saying all the information in this image is basically dark. Yeah. Now I can recover that to some extent by increasing the exposure. I can bring up the shadows. I can bring up the blacks. Right? All of that, can you see now, changes the data. So that's kind of mathematically shifting everything by basically moving it through this histogram, by increasing the exposure, increasing the shadows, and increasing the blacks. Looks pretty crummy, but that's what you get. But that's kind of what I was shooting for, and it's kind of arty. I showed an image similar to this as a first or second week, probably for shutter speed, and either that or composition. And I was describing, how fortunate it was. We got this bluebird kept flying up to the window of a cabin that we rented in Georgia or the mountains of Tennessee or on the east. 1600th of a second, high shutter speed, f5 because I was trying to blur the background, but a high ISO. And this, well, you know what? Let's look at this in Lightroom as well. Question is, which one is it? Doesn't really matter, I guess. Let me tell you this story, right? So you can see I'm kind of experimenting here. I suspect what I did, I set manually 1600th of a second to try and freeze the motion. I knew I could have gone to 2000, but had I done that, that really would have pushed the ISO even higher, introducing more noise. I set my stop the aperture wide open. For this lens, 2.8 is as wide as it goes. I'm letting as much light in as I possibly can to try and balance the fact I have a very fast shutter speed, and I'm letting the camera control the ISO, knowing it's probably going to be quite high, but also knowing that with this camera that I've got, with this sensor, using post-processing tools, I can remove a lot of the noise later on. But this is kind of this was my very first shot. You remember this bluebird, it's bouncing against the window. Somebody did tell me that they kind of get a reflection and they're just being territorial. And these were my first images. The rest of the family went out for a walk on this day, and I said, I'm staying behind. I'm going to take photos of the crazy bird hitting its head against the window. Kind of cool. I'm getting there now, right? I'm zoning in a little bit on what this rascal is doing. Oh, actually, that's true. I love the expressions on these, right? And it's bouncing up and down the window, so you can see all the dirt in the window. That shows. Yeah, so I'm fighting that, and that's not noise. That's now just stuff on the window. Right, get in there. Okay, that one's in focus, and that is the image I got. So that's the image. I show you what it actually was out of camera. So this is a processed image. That's what it was. And then I processed it a little bit in Lightroom, and I finally get that image, right? I've darkened the background, and then I brought it into Photoshop, done a few edits, cleaned it up, got rid of the gunk off the window and things like that. Got a really, really nice image. But this was all deliberate. 16th, I'm struggling tonight. 1600th of a second, Very fast shutter speed, very shallow depth of field, but it's wide open to let lots of light in to balance that fast shutter speed. And I'm saying to the camera, you control the ISO. If you could keep it low, I'd appreciate it, but you know, do what you have to do. And so if you go through some of these other ones, and what I'm trying to show you here as much as anything is, you know, you just have to experiment. But at the same time here, in a very similar way to how I went scouting and I got that good picture of the Eiffel Tower, I took my time with this image or with this experimenting, trying to be smart, you know, trying to put into practice what I know from a shutter speed and aperture setting relative to a bird that is moving fast. That's so cool. Look at that. Looks like it's looking right down. And in of themselves, right, the actual image here is not that great because it's so messy. But once you start getting into some post-processing abilities and you can cut the image out, these are the kind of images you can get. And honestly, I love these series of images because they were some of the first really good bird images that I'd taken, and it allowed me to, you know, extend my craft, as it were, as I put into practice some of the things I learned. I think it's finally, this is another one again, that's the original, and then you're able to produce that. So remember as well, when you see images like this online, if you see my images, and there's others on this call who are also very good at photography from the group and post-processing. When you see our images, they are rarely straight from camera. So why do I say that? I don't want you to take an image, bring it into Lightroom or onto the computer, look at it, and say, oh my word, this just doesn't look as good as Martin's or whomever else's image, right? Or the other images you see on Facebook. Know that it could have started out like that. Now, having said all that, there's some really great bird photographers who, you know, they're not shooting through a window and they're doing it great and they get an almost perfect image. But generally, images have been processed in some way. And it takes time to be able to do this kind of thing, right? But it's just practice. Any questions at all on that? All right, so correctly exposing. This was an image I took on a Viking river cruise recently. Where was this? This was in Bordeaux, France. And this shot was taken at 1/160th of a second at f6.3, ISO 8000. So a very high ISO. This is a 105 millimeter lens, so 1/60th of a second is fine for that. Again, this is handheld, so no tripod. 6.3. I'm quite a ways away from here, maybe 200 feet, and everything from the front of these boats here all the way through to the trees is going to be in focus with 6.3. Again, maybe f8, f11 could have been better, but then again, I'm going to be pushing up the ISO too high. So at this point where I am on my photography journey, I am trying to think about, you know, what's a sensible shutter speed for hand holding, how far away is the subject, how far away is the background, what settings shall I use here, such that I get enough light in and enough depth of field that it won't make my ISO crazy. And that's pretty high, but nevertheless, I was still able to get a nice image in Photoshop. So I'm going to go through these three images here and explain some of the differences in Lightroom. All right, so this is the image straight from the camera. Is it? Yes, that's straight from the camera. Look at that. So that's one of those where you hardly have to do anything to it. If I zoom in on it though, let's have a look. If you go, especially if you go into some of these areas where it's a little bit dark, don't know whether you see it, but I see noise along here, grainy stuff down here. It's yeah, there's just black dots all over it. Printed out, if it's not too big, this would look okay. Printing it out large, you'd certainly see that noise. So that one's okay. There is a feature in Lightroom under detail. I'm not going to demonstrate this because it should be pretty obvious, but if you go to press denoise, that would analyze this image and it would ultimately really smooth it out, take a lot of that noise out, preserve most of the sharpness. It's a balance sometimes between how much noise you take out and how much sharpness you lose. It's not there are better programs, third-party programs, than the denoise even in Lightroom, but it's pretty good. And on an image like this, it would work quite well to get rid of that noise. All right, so that's those are the settings for this. Let's look at the next one. This is 60th of a second, so it's a slower shutter speed, and if you notice, it's brighter. So compare it to this one. This is 1/60th of a second, and 6.3, 8,000. This is 60th of a second, 6.3, 8,000, right? So the thing that's changed here is the shutter speed. It's a slower shutter speed, so more light getting in. But I know it was dark. It was getting pretty dark. This is more like the actual scene. This one is overexposed, and if you look over here, you can see the exposure range. It's a good distribution. Let's have a look what this one was. This too is a fairly decent distribution. But given that I know it was darker than this, I can get the exposure, bring it down a little bit, and that's probably more like it. The thing I'm not liking is when you see no data here, that basically means you don't have any light. Really, basically means you've got room to make it brighter. So you can make it brighter with that, but the overall scene is getting too bright for me, and I'm losing the sunset. So that's the sunset. This area would have been a little bit brighter, and you bring that up now using the shadows. And maybe I can make the highlights a little brighter. Maybe if I make those darker, but then bring the exposure up a little bit, you know. And so you play around until you get a image which either looks pleasing to you or is more akin to actually what was going on there. So that's still nice and bright, and still maintaining the sunset. And then it comes down to a personal choice as to which one do you want to keep. Now I zoomed out on this one. This is 47 millimeters. This one zoomed in all the way to 105. I think I've got too much information in this, or too much, so I would normally crop this like that. Again, it depends what you want. In fact, I like the church in it. Church, and kind of remembering rule of thirds approximately. Maybe not. And there's an image. So that's honestly, when I'm editing photos or processing them in this way, that's the kind of thing I'm doing. I'm playing around with sliders. I try and remember what it was like. I usually try and take a reference image, and then I'm playing around with other things to get something that is a pleasing image. There's a lot more work I would do on this, to be honest with you. I'd darken the sky more and things, but what I'm showing you here is I've got a really high ISO, so it's 1/10 of a second, so it's slow, very slow, but I think I've got my hand on a railing. There was a railing there. I'm putting my hand on a railing and I'm stabilizing it. F9, that's gone up a little bit, but look how my ISO has gone up. The net result of that is I've got noise in the image. Again, I don't know if you can see it over Zoom, but there is noise in the image. The worst thing, though, of this overexposing is I've lost all data here. There are no clouds or no sunset here. And I know that. So this is, if I take the exposure, let me reset this image. Actually, that's That's what the image was. That's how the image was taken from the camera. And I can process it a little bit, right? Maybe if that was the only image I had from this trip or of this scene, and I want to try and recover it, I would bring the exposure all the way down, and I can see what that should do. See if we go to this one. If I take the exposure all the way down, you see the image basically goes black. That means I haven't blown anything out. I haven't lost any information. Go back to here, and if I can still see stuff there, having taken the exposure all the way down, that basically means I've completely lost information. There is no information there in the file relative to that scene. And so all I can do is my best job, try and bring a few things down. I would then have to take this image into Photoshop, which I did do earlier just to prove I could do it. I put another sky. Actually, I put another sky in there. I blended in the sky, and that's the kind of thing you have to do if this is all you've got. But I'm just trying to illustrate here. If you put the ISO, if the camera puts the ISO too high, you do have a risk of not only noise, but losing complete information as well. Recovering exposure. So here's the histogram for this image. This was 1,000th of a second, 2.8 with ISO 100. Look at the shutter speed. It's very high. It's quite I think this is straight from camera, so this is a little dark. This is a little darker than it actually was. You know that because there's no information here. So I'm not sure whether I did this on full manual. I'm going to guess that my ISO was set to 100, and I know I wanted a nice blurry scene. I wanted blur around here, this to be in focus, and so that's my focus point there, and everything else will be blurred at 2.8, and then I'm going to get that maybe this was automatic. Maybe I had it set for 1,000. I can't honestly remember, but it's underexposed. What could I have done? Well, I could have decreased the shutter speed, and if I decreased the shutter speed from 1,000 to 1/500th of a second, it would make the image twice as light. Because what's happening is, if I have a shutter speed and it goes open, close, and that lets so much light in, if I go open, close, and it's half the time period, it lets twice the time period, because it's a slow shutter speed, then it lets twice the amount of light in, and so 500th is half of, or double 1,000th, and therefore twice as much light is getting in. And that's kind of the image you can get after you process it. So let me show you how to do that. So there's the image. This information here, by the way, you can get rid of by hitting the I key. Get rid of that. This should be, if I've reset the image here, so this is straight from the camera. First thing I'm going to do is, notice this spot here? That's a dust spot. It's probably on it's a dust spot on the sensor. Remember when I showed you the inside of that camera? Every time you take a lens off, you run the risk of little dust particles getting in there, and those are called dust spots, and they appear as little artifacts like that. And so to get rid of that, I go to this healing brush, and if I click visualize spots, and then you move the slider, it shows you where the spots are. So thankfully, I've only got one dust spot on this sensor at this time. So I must have just cleaned it, because usually my sensor is a bit more dirty than this, which would make sense. Going on a trip, I would have cleaned it beforehand. But there is a dust spot. So I set this back to here, go back to the healing, and just go back to turn that off. Now I have a brush. I'm just putting the brush over that spot, and it's selected an image there and blended it in with that. And now I've got rid of that dust spot, which if you print those out, if you print images out with dust spots on, especially, you really, somehow they stand out way more on a print than they do on a computer screen. So that's a really important thing to check. So okay, we've done that. It's because I'm probably 5 miles, 10 miles away from, I don't know, 5 miles at least away from the tower here. So there's a lot of atmosphere, and the atmosphere creates kind of a haze. So the way you get rid of that is using dehaze. You see how that's sort of making things clearer. Before we go there, let's have a look at just increasing the exposure. I have all of this room here. I'm going to bring the exposure up to something that probably looks about right. Go too far, I'm losing information. It's too bright. I'm going to bring it down again. I'm also looking at the foreground, so I want that to be part of the image as well. Then I'll go to dehaze, and that just brings definition through adding a certain kind of contrast to the edges of things. So now already, if I hit the backslash key, I've gone from that to that. Already, so it's a lot clearer. What else should I do with this? I'm going to play around with colors. I'm going to go to Color Mixer. On the saturation panel, I'm going to take saturation down for everything. And this is a really cool trick. So I could have just desaturated, right? And that would have got something similar to this. But what I can do now is look at what colors are in this image. So if I take magenta, I slide it all the way up. There's no magenta in this image, so I'm going to keep that all the way down. Purple, I'm not seeing any. There's a little bit of purple appearing, but nothing major. I'm going to keep that down. Blue, should be loads of blue. Right, that's a blue image. So now it comes down to how much blue in this image do I want? I'm going to leave it there. Kind of a gray blue, aqua or aqua. A little bit, but nothing for me. Green, yep, no trees. Yellows, there should be yellows. I'm seeing a little bit of yellow come, so I'll leave that around the midpoint. Oranges, we've got bricks and things. There we go. That nice color in there. So I'm going to just bring that back a little bit. It's important with a lot of these sliders, especially some of the color ones that you don't go to. You can get really funky images, artifacts. So I always like to bring them back a little bit. And then reds, and there's some, if you look at this area here, there's a little light there or something. Yeah, there's definitely some red there. And so this eyeball, if I click the eyeball, that's what it was, and that's what I've got now. It's not a massive change, but it's now I've controlled the actual colors in the image that I want. If I go to hue, I can now sort of change red to be purpley red or orangey red. So I can play around with that. It's not doing a whole lot on the reds. You see that chimney in the middle, how that goes more reddish or more yellow. And I can lean that. Look at the yellows. There wasn't much yellow. So that you can also, so that's how you play around or bring out different colors in an image using this color mixer. There's a lot more you can do with that, but that's a basic overview. One of the things I really do want to do is make the Eiffel Tower stand out. So I'm going to go to the masking tools. Everything I've done so far will be called a global adjustment. It's applied globally everywhere through the image. Now I'm going to use a target adjustment. So I'm going to click on the subject, and that should detect the main subject in here. Not done a bad job. It's got this antenna, a few other bits and pieces, a little bit of the roof, but it's certainly picked out the Eiffel Tower, which is the most tricky part to select in this. So I want to make the Eiffel Tower stand out, but I don't want to make these other red areas stand out. So I am going to what I've done here is created a mask. Everything in red is a mask, and that means if I apply, let's say just now exposure, everything that was red highlighted has now been brightened, and I clearly don't want to do that. So I want to subtract. I'm just going to select a brush, and I am going to put the overlay back on. I am going to get rid of this and this. Make my brush smaller, that way I can be more accurate with it. Now I'm going to zoom in to get rid of. Yeah, might be a little bit more careful if I was doing it for real, but that's not bad. To make my brush larger and smaller, I use the plus keys. Again, this is not a, an in-depth training course, so sorry if I'm going through things a little bit fast. As much as anything, I'm just trying to show you the concepts. And there's plenty of great videos out there that you can go and dig into later on. And I am just refining it ever so slightly, such that now I've got a decent selection of the tower. I'm going to go now and select the clarity. I know clarity brings out punch. I now slide the clarity all the way up and leave it there. Did that come through as being a lot more? Yeah, right. Carol, I love that fact you've gone video. I can see you nodding all the way through this, so thank you. So I'm going to put clarity there. Again, with clarity, it looks good when I'm not zoomed in like this, but if I was to zoom in, I would see artifacts. I just know that. So I'm going to zoom back it off a little bit. Textures, I could try texture. That seems to bring some kind of clarity, especially to the innards of it. So I'll leave that there. I'll turn off the mask. And so now if I do a before and after, so that's my before, blah, that's my after. And I shot this image very, very specifically because when I visited Paris in the late, when was it? Sorry. I visited Paris early 90s before I'd even moved to the States with my family. And I had this shot and we printed it out, had it on. This was before I was really into photography. Printed it out and we had it on our little coffee table for years to remind ourselves of this trip. So when we went back about 20 years later, I wanted to get something from the same scene. And so that's why I took these images. All right, so that's really made that stand out now. This is a bit of a distraction for me. I kind of like it because it shows, it's a rooftop antenna, but it's a distraction. So I'm going to go to this remove tool again. And this time I'm going to, there's 3 remove tools here. There's a clone stamp. That literally just means I can copy from one area and paste it directly over another area. This heel copies an area and pastes it over another area, but blends it in as well. It's a little bit smarter. And then this one is a remove tool. And if you use the generative AI, which in this instance is wonderful, you can paint over something. It's going to work. Come on, here we are. Paint into the chimneys, and if the AI works, it should recognize, okay, I know you painted over chimneys, but they're really part of the scene, so we'll leave those in there. Painted over these flats, tall buildings, and so I need to click remove. There we go, click remove. Remove area using AI, and it's supposed to interrogate that scene, use its artificial intelligence, and bam, it puts something in. It hasn't done the best job. It's left a little bit of the, let's cancel, go away. It's left a little bit there, but what you can always do is go in again and just get it. Previous 5 times I tried this, it worked perfectly. But that's artificial intelligence for you. And then remove. Oh, it's put a light in. Look at that. You see how it's put that light in? Gee, I hate this program. It's useless. Yeah, well, it's doing its own thing. It is artificial intelligence after all. So you can get rid of that. Let me go to this one. There we go. That one's done it. So using various different tools, you can get rid of things. But you can see here, can you see when I hover? It's literally copied from this area over to here. and kind of blended it in. So that's that done. And then what I might want to do, since it was an autumnal scene, go back to the global things, I might just warm it up a little bit. Just warm it up like that. And that kind of gives it a nice hue. And if I go to calibration, a lot of people don't use calibration in Lightroom. And if you go into the hues, for the first thing you do is look at shadows, and you just play around. Yeah, that makes it greener. That makes it more magenta. I don't like that. Change the reds. It's changing the colors of them, but I like the red as it is, and I'm just going to boost it. So that's really added a lot of red. That's taken more red out or saturated. I'm just going to add a little bit. If you notice, I'm getting some reddish over here, which I don't like, and I'll deal with that in a second. Same for saturation of the greens. Let me see what that does. It's interesting, I'm boosting the greens in saturation, but it's actually helping with the reds. And then the blue, boost the blue, same deal. It actually boosts the red. I kind of like that, but I don't like what it's done up here. I don't know whether you can see that, but this is whitish, this is reddish, and I'm going to go back to I'm going to add a radial gradient, and I am going to select that area, and I am going to change the color temperature. Oops, I don't want to change it to blue. Just trying to take out some of that reddish orange that it put in, but maybe I take the saturation down. There we go. If I take saturation down a little bit, it's balancing it out. And then I'm going to copy that mask. Let's copy, duplicate mask. Paste it over here. And I do the same thing. And that brings a balance. I'd spend more time on that in an image, making it balance a little better. But again, I think it's shown how you can get rid of little artifacts there. So that's kind of a before and after. A lot clearer, a lot of color. I love the color in here. I love the chimney pots and everything. Kind of the old and the new. But obviously the Eiffel Tower is the thing that really stands out. Yeah. Any questions? Anything in chat, Diane?
No, the chat is clear.
Excellent. So this cabin that we went to, where I took the bird photos, and this is my grandson a few years ago and his dad. They're walking down this, we literally just arrived and I parked the car here and they go for a little walk and then explore. I just love this, right? Obviously, it means a lot to me. And I'm not even saying this is an amazing image, right? But for me, I love the image because it's my granddad and my son-in-law who I love tremendously. They're all awesome father and husband to my daughter. And, you know, I love the fact we kind of got this bend, but shoot, what a place to park the car, right? Terrible planning. This thing, awful. But so I tried to zoom in and I couldn't, it just doesn't still capture, you know, things. So in a combination of Lightroom and Photoshop, I took out the car, I took out this, I rebuilt some of the road. This was before AI, so maybe this was 3 years ago, before AI really became popular in some of the tools. I rebuilt the tree at the bottom, the path, and then created something like this. So why am I showing you that? Don't let a few objects in an image spoil what really was there. The road really comes around, the tree is there, the grasses are there. This was, yeah, no one should have built that there anyway. Right? So I got rid of that. I blended in some of the gravel and things. But you can see here, this pile of stones is clearly from that pile of stones, right, as I've copied and things. But, you know, create your images as you want to see them. I personally like to do this kind of thing. Not everybody does, but I think for me, it just captures the moment a little bit better. So that is it, guys. I've got more photos I could edit for you, but I think you've seen enough right there. That's it. I'm not. These are your exercises for session 4. Take some photographs. Build some. Come on, Martin. Hey, keep it real, friends. There we go. Build some friendships and go have fun. Join BPG if you want to. Been fun for me these last 4 sessions. Hope you appreciate the time and energy that we've put into it. I certainly appreciate you guys turning up each week, listening to my dry Northern British sense of humor. Yeah, it's been fun for me. So thank you. Any questions before we say goodbye here? Yes, Carol.
Yes. What is the name of that free mobile app for Lightroom that you mentioned at a previous class? I recently purchased a new phone. I'm going to be turning it on tomorrow, and I'd have room for something like that.
Interesting. Yeah. So just go to just type in Lightroom mobile or mobile. And yeah, you should be able to find it. There are, you know, it's up to you, Carol. You can, I think we've mentioned, I think Diane actually clarified that the cost for Lightroom as a subscription with Photoshop is $10 a month, which for many of us is okay. I know some people really object to paying subscriptions for software and things, but if you do, but that's kind of the minimum paid package, and it's very good. But if you just want it on I believe on mobile devices, so that would be an iPhone or an iPad, just do iPhone mobile. And you've got my email address, so if you struggle installing it, struggle getting photos into it, send me a quick note. You can always jump on a quick Zoom, Carol, and I'll walk you through it.
Oh, thank you very much. Does it have to be an iPhone?
Oh, is yours a
It's an Android Galaxy A03s.
Okay, it's okay. Don't worry. It's my new iPhone 11. It gets a little 16. Sorry, yeah, it gets a little upset when it hears that, Carol. Yeah, I think it does work on a Galaxy.
It works on my Galaxy.
Yeah, good. So Megan, you've installed it?
I've installed it and played around just a little bit.
Yeah, good.
It works just fine.
Right. Yeah.
So Martin, you have several thank yous, great presentations, and we do have a question. How long are your Zoom recordings available for viewing?
Forever. So we have, right now I'm sending links to the Zoom recording, so that they're there on our file there. Diane, I'm going to guess that we may periodically delete those. You might know better than me, but what we are also doing is putting them all on a YouTube channel, but that is a members only YouTube channel. So if you want access to these, you know, maybe these will be available for the next month or so. Yeah, and beyond that, after that, you have to access them through the YouTube channel, and you can only do that, I believe, if you are a Brentwood Photography member.
And Lee also states that it works great on a Pixel phone.
Sorry, was that a question or a statement?
Statement.
Good. Well, if there's no more questions tonight, thank you again. Do feel free always to contact me. Hopefully you can tell I love to do this, and I'm always happy to help. So anyway, without further ado, thank you everybody. Really appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Martin.
Thank you very much.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.